everybody. I am Seema Kumar, and welcome to Cure. I'm the CEO of Cure. We call Cure an innovation campus. We have a physical infrastructure here, wet labs, dry labs, office space, hot desks for entrepreneurs. But we also have a whole digital ecosystem where you can accelerate your research. So we're focused on the scientist entrepreneur, someone like a very young William Powell. Ultimately, the mission is to cure disease. And so that's what Cure is all about. We are also very focused on bringing some of the latest and greatest and inspirational figures like Dr. Powell here to the ecosystem so we can learn from him, but also talk about new things that are coming out, like your book. So welcome to Cure.
Thanks, Seema. It's really great to be here.
Yeah, great to have you here. And I haven't fully finished the book yet, but I think I'm about more than halfway through. And I have to say, I haven't been able to put the book down. And I take the train into the city every day. And I get irritated when people come and ask me for the ticket or this or that because I'm so engrossed in the book. It's a phenomenal book, so congratulations.
Thank you so much.
What inspired you to write this book? Let me start there.
Yeah, sure. So I wrote the book for three main reasons. One is to highlight the unsung heroes of drug development. Every day there are many, many scientists that are hidden from the public, that are working really hard, that aren't necessarily motivated by money or fame, but really to try to make a difference. And I think they deserve to have their stories told because they're just toiling away and working to make the next breakthroughs for society. The second reason is there's actually too few books about innovation in drug discovery. So when I was the head of Roche Pharma Research Early Development, I was trying to read as many books as possible about innovation. And there are a lot about computers, about going to the moon, about electric cars, about iPhones, but there's very few about drug discovery. And I thought that actually there's just as much innovation, if not more, innovation going on in drug discovery, because unlike an iPhone, which you can put in your pocket but not your mouth, you actually have to put a medicine into your body, and it can't kill you, and also has to help you. So for that reason, I think there's actually more innovation. And then the third reason was to really inspire the next generation to make the next set of breakthroughs. It doesn't have to be in biomedical science, but just to make the breakthroughs that they are inspired to do.
It's amazing because, as someone who's been in the industry for a very long time and have worked with, organizations like pharma and bio and all that, we're always strategizing about how to tell the story of why this industry is so important and why scientists toil day and night and through many failures and potentially no success to do the work that they do. And sometimes the facts and the figures and all of that get lost, right? And what you want to do is storytelling. And your book does it through storytelling. And so from the very moment I opened the first chapter and I read about the Brazilian pit viper, and from there it went on to the discovery of the ACE inhibitors. It was just gripping, right? And to know because it's not just a straightforward line, right? Like there's multiple different teams and multiple different things that kind of collide ultimately to create that final breakthrough. So why did you choose storytelling as your method for this book?
That's an interesting question. I think, if you think about media training that I've had, what I've learned is that stories, sound bites, and statistics are what people remember, and you try to tell things in three different ways. So you tell them through stories, through sound bites, and through statistics, and then hopefully at least one of those three will hit the public. But stories in particular are what people remember. And I think scientists often get caricatured into a specific stereotype. But I really tried to convey in the book that scientists are regular people motivated by things such as loss of a parent or a relative. They're working really hard. They have hobbies such as cycling or collecting bugs or driving race cars, just like everybody.
They have bands. And they play music sometimes.
That's right. Yeah.
Yes.
And so really tried to tell the human story of what's going on and why these scientists are motivated to make breakthroughs for patients.
What motivated you?
Oh yeah. So when I was 13, my father unfortunately died of metastatic colon cancer. It was unexpected, and I vowed at that time that I would try to make a difference, although I didn't know how. Now, being the son of a doctor, two doctors, it was expected that I would go into medicine. But again, I didn't know how. And then ultimately, 20 years later, after a gazillion years of training, I was then a physician scientist trying to make a difference for cancer patients.
And so, that's a very unique breed, right? Physician scientist. Somebody who's in the clinic, who's actually taking care of patients, can actually see the unmet medical need. And then somebody who's a scientist, who's tinkering, technically, with, at the very microscopic, nanoscopic sometimes levels to say, okay, how am I going to understand, the biomedical mechanisms through which something happens, and then connect the dots. So tell me about the importance of translational research and why that is important, or the link between the clinic and the lab, and why that is important for breakthroughs and creating medicines.
Yeah, so I think MD PhDs, having been one, I'm a little biased, but I think you get a really unique training, because not only do you get training in the laboratory and you can speak the laboratory vocabulary and you know how to design experiments, but you also get training in the hospital and you know how to talk to the doctors and patients. So being at that intersection, then it really allows you to do what's called translational research, which is observe something happening in humans, whether they have a particular disease or they respond to a particular medicine in a certain way, and then really start to ask, well, why are they responding in that way or not? Why is their disease developing like that, and so on? And then you may have the tools to go back into the laboratory and try to figure it out. Then once you're in the laboratory and you figure it out, you can go back and ultimately, hopefully, eventually develop a medicine or some kind of intervention for patients. So it's really critical to be able to do that and go back and forth. Because as you'll see in breakthrough, right, every medicine, if you want to make a medicine, you have to have the intersection of biological understanding, clinical understanding, and technological advancement. You haven't gotten to the last chapter yet, but
okay, don't spoiler alert.
Okay, sure. But I don't think you can have a medicine without getting to this intersection. If you think of Venn diagram, and hopefully a doctor, scientist will be able to cover some biology and clinic, and maybe some of the technology as well.
And this also sort of breaks the myth, right, of what people see in popular media, or the image of a scientist, right? A single lone individual peering through a microscope, and that's what, if you Google images, that's what you see. But really, scientific discovery, breakthrough, medicines, it's a team sport. It's not an individual eureka moment. There may be eureka moments, but the whole, process involves a team. And you talk a lot about that in the book as well.
Yeah.
Because it's not just one scientist, one lab, but it's almost an international effort that a lot of different people are involved in.
Yeah, I just noticed walking in, the logo for The Cure is innovation, collaboration, and celebration. So collaboration is definitely required to make a drug. I think it's the ultimate team sport. And as you mentioned, it's not only teams within a company or a pharma company. You're talking about collective teams over centuries sometimes. And sometimes, as you'll see in the book, there might be a particular observation from 1910, and then no breakthrough till 1940 something, and then no further breakthrough till 1990. But then once there's some key insight, in 2005 or something, then you can actually make a drug. And so you really have to think about the whole arc of history when the drugs are developed.
Yep.
And that also makes it hard to do the storytelling, right? Because people want a simple story. They just want one hero.
You can't make it snackable and a 5-minute video.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, and it just reminds me of the mRNAs, right? Like Kathleen Carrico was working on this mRNA vaccine for God knows how long, and, just toiling away. And all of a sudden, COVID happens, and then suddenly it becomes relevant, and she wins the Nobel Prize, right?
Yeah.
So this is what, there's an aspect of serendipity, but there's also an aspect of the medical need. One of the things that also struck me in reading the book is the importance of the pharmaceutical industry and enterprise for scaling, because no matter how great a breakthrough, no matter how much you've optimized, the molecule, no matter how much preclinical development you've done, at the end of the day, to really scale it up and invest the amount of capital you need for clinical trials and then produce it, manufacture it, and bring it to market, you ultimately need a huge amount of investment. And that's where the pharmaceutical sector comes in. And their role often, most of the time, the first thing people think about is, bad pharma, evil pharma, etc. So, and you explained that beautifully in the storytelling of why that part is important. That is the biotech reaches so far, but then they have to go find a pharma partner.
Yeah, so it's very interesting. There's a quote in the book from David Altshuler, who's the CSO of Vertex.
Yes.
Yeah, so he said it's like building a bridge with Lego and then trying to build a bridge across the Hudson. Yeah. So it's the pharma company that builds the bridge across the Hudson. It's the academic or the biotech that can build the bridge with Lego. I don't mean that in a negative sense, but just more from a philosophical sense. Yes, it's very common that an amazing discovery is done in academia and you can cure mice and maybe take it to humans and then and show in a few patients that that your idea is correct. But a medicine has to be given globally to patients around the world. Hopefully every single product is the exact same with the same quality, et cetera, et cetera. And to do that, you really need the scale of a pharma company. And part of the book it's not a book like praising pharma or anything like that, but I tried to really show what happens inside a pharma company because most people don't know what happens. And actually there's very few books where you have access to get those insights. But what the company actually has to do to go from the idea to then make a product that's given around the world.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because, you need all of the different players because, pharma most often does not have the patience or, the ability to do that basic breakthrough discovery. So you need that part of the ecosystem, you need this part of the ecosystem, and it's, the whole thing has to work together. And, I wonder, there is, one of the things that I found also interesting about the book, and I find this a lot just in general, so many biotech companies were started because either a parent or a patient was chasing after his or her own cure, right? And that is just amazing to me to look at the patient perspective. And in the story of the rare disease, SMA, you have the person who is the parent of the child who's impacted is funding this research and is at the table as part of the decision making. And you see that a lot in rare diseases, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's quite an extraordinary story.
Yeah.
Fortunately, Lauren Eng was able to share her story with also Arya Singh, who has a patient with spinal muscular atrophy. Actually, Arya, they both live in New York. But when her daughter was born with SMA and she found out that there was basically no treatment, she and her husband funded the research that ultimately actually led to 3 different medicines that got approved. The particular chapter that I wrote about is about risdiplam, which is a small molecule oral splicing modifier for spinal muscular atrophy. And the chapter also chronicles how Arya was struggling and her disease was getting worse while the scientists were trying to work on a cure. And happy to say that she's doing well now and she just got married actually.
Yeah? Oh, excellent. That's great. That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we have so many stories right here in this cure building ecosystem. One, for example, Dr. David Feigenbaum, who was on his deathbed almost, chasing his own cure because he had Castleman's disease. And then finally found out that there was one particular drug that, is already marketed that worked for him and he was cured. And so that led to the formation of a new company. It's a non-for-profit called EveryCure, where they're using AI and ML to pretty much scan the entire, all the marketed drugs, FDA-approved drugs, and test them for, new indications. And so it seems it's just an extraordinary thing to look at it from the patient's eyes, and that's something that people don't often talk about. You also explain a lot of basic biology, right, and biomedical engineering to some degree in your book. there's a glossary, but there's also, you start from, what is RNA, what is DNA, how splicing occurs, all of this in very, very lay language. Why did you do that?
Yeah, so the book, I was really trying to write it for the curious reader. I would say you probably need to have a little bit of biological background to appreciate some of the science, but I was trying to make it accessible as possible to the public. And as you probably all know, the scientific concepts can sometimes be very, very complicated. So tried to use a lot of analogies, tried to explain it in as simple terms as possible, and at least hopefully people get the gist of what's happening. I think part of the reason I also wanted to really do that is to have the public appreciate that these are really challenging concepts. And so, for example, risdiplam is an oral splicing small molecule modifier. It's the very first actually ever produced, but you need to know what splicing is, and therefore you need to know it. You go from DNA to RNA to protein and so on. So I did try to explain that. Or there's another chapter about emicizumab, which is a bispecific antibody for hemophilia A that was developed by Chugai. And so not only was that a molecule that needed to figure out how to bind to certain factors in the blood, but then it also had to be produced on a massive scale. Mm-hmm. And I tried to show the public is, just producing a bispecific antibody, this was back in the early 2000 teens, took a massive engineering feat from basically geniuses who figured out how to do that. And so really trying to just show that there's a lot of science going on in every step of the way, not just finding the biological target, but then also in engineering that protein and so on. Or, there's chemists who are heroes in the book too. And again, there's just so much science in a molecule that I think is underappreciated.
It was fascinating. And you also talk about Alzheimer's disease. I mean, that's still a really hard problem to solve. And it's a big tsunami because, as we live longer, because we're curing other diseases, more and more people are, more susceptible to Alzheimer's. So talk a little bit about that, and what do you think is required, number one? And then number two, what from today's model to tomorrow's potential model, what could we do to create some sort of a consortia approach to solve this?
Yeah, so I think I talk about Alzheimer's tangentially in hoping that the next generation of people inspired by my book and others will come up with cures for Alzheimer's disease. I think if you go back to what I was saying about the Venn diagram of biological understanding, clinical understanding, and technological advancement, you really need all of those elements to come together to make a launchable drug. And I think in Alzheimer's disease, it's just one of those areas where it's not quite mature enough. I know we have some molecules like antibodies targeting the A-beta protein, but the efficacy, in my opinion, is not, super transformative. And so we need, basically a better understanding of actually what's going on. Now, neurological diseases obviously are challenging because you can't biopsy people all the time and things like that. But I'm sure we're going to make advances, as you talked about, with AI and better understanding. In the very last afterward part of the book, I say how I'm super excited about the future because, this is the biological century, meaning that our understanding of biology is really going to dominate, multiple areas. And actually, we're accelerating the pace of drug development now. So I did recount stories that have taken 100 years. But now our understanding is much, much greater, and the tools that we have are amazing. And also we do have a better infrastructure set up to test clinical trials and patients and so on. So I only see more and more drugs getting approved in the years to come.
That's great. That's great news. And you talked about that we haven't yet touched fully on the third wheel of this Venn diagram, right? We talked about clinical, we talked about the biology, the lab. AI, I mean, by far, that's been like the biggest, huge, transformational thing that has happened in the last couple years, and especially like, the large language, models. And so what do you think those new technologies, anything in the future, will do for drug discovery? Will they cut the cost? Will they reduce timelines? What is your prediction?
Yeah, so I think there's a little bit of hype still, but it is very exciting. I did hear a talk from the CSO of Microsoft, who basically said that those who use AI will replace those who do not use AI, and I do believe that. And so we're all going to have to become accustomed to using it. I even use it. I even used it today, and you can amazingly ask simple questions that in the past took a very long time to figure out. But I just basically asked like, oh, what is the Cmax of this drug in nanomolar concentration? And like, it splits it out like in 2 seconds. And
Have
it actually
you asked
shows
it
you.
how to cure Alzheimer's?
I have not, but I have asked it to be, you know, what are the theories of cancer and what are more provocative theories? And can you give me even more provocative ones, you know, just to keep pushing the system? I do think that it's going to definitely accelerate parts of drug development. You know, in terms of narrowing the number of small molecules maybe that you need to generate. It will help us understand proteins better in terms of finding pockets, in terms of you know, finding targets and things like that. Hopefully it will help us to identify patients much faster. I think the actual part of clinical trials, if you need to treat somebody for 52 weeks, obviously it's not going to accelerate that part. But the data generation and the data gathering should all accelerate. You know, I used to say, because at Roche PRED, we had a lot of efforts in ML AI, and this was in 2018, 2019. I used to say, oh, you know, AI will never win the Nobel Prize. Like, it needs to have serendipity for some discovery. And then AlphaFold just won. So I was wrong.
Yeah. It's nice to be wrong like that,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So imagine, I mean, what advice would you give the younger you? Because there are many, you know, researchers like you who are looking for how to take their idea for cures and bring it to market. And they often go through the valley of death, and you know, some of them never see the light of day. So what advice do you have, and what kind of resources do you think we should provide young researchers, translational researchers like that?
Oh, that's a great question. Well, first of all, I'm a big advocate of curiosity-driven research. I still think there's a huge role for curiosity-driven research, and you'll see in the book that many of the original ideas just came out of scientists and clinicians just purely curious about how nature works. And we need to make sure that that is funded. I know NIH is moving more towards, quote, translational research, but I do think we'll lose a lot if we don't fund the basic science research. The second advice I guess I would give is, well, obviously you need to enjoy what you're doing because it can be a long haul. And you do need to enjoy the moment because there will be highs, but there'll very often be, and probably even
many
more
more
often
lows
be many
than
more lows, right?
Yeah.
So related to that then, and one of the themes of the book is you really need resilience and determination. And that comes throughout many of the stories. So even for, there's a chapter on alpelisib from Novartis where they brought 4 molecules into clinic. And it was only the 4th molecule, the PI3K inhibitor, that got approved. Or there's another story about Stuart Orkin, who many of you may know. He's a scientist at the Dana-Farber, who in 1978 started working on the problem of fetal hemoglobin switching. So that's basically when you're born, you have fetal hemoglobin, or when you're a fetus, you have fetal hemoglobin, and then when you're born, you transition from fetal hemoglobin to adult hemoglobin. And people realize that patients with sickle cell disease, when they're born with the fetal hemoglobin, they don't have the symptoms as they do when they all of a sudden have the adult hemoglobin, which is sickled. So a big question in the field was, how does hemoglobin switch from fetal to adult? And he started working on that problem in 1978. And basically for 30 years, he and others made no progress. I mean, they made a lot of other discoveries, but they didn't find any reason or what the molecule was. And it was only something that came out of left field, a molecular epidemiology study, a genome-wide association study that led to the big breakthrough. And then he was right there in 2007 with that breakthrough, and then ultimately was able to translate that into what Vertex and CRISPR made into a molecule. But I don't know if everyone would spend 30 years of their life on one particular problem.
But God bless him. Yeah,
exactly.
That's great. Yes, I'm sure the patients are very happy. So we're celebrating the Lunar New Year.
Okay, thank you.
Right, Happy New Year. everybody has something in their chair. So, and it's a year of the snake. What's the significance of that? And do we make New Year's resolutions for Lunar New Year? And if so, what would the New Year resolution be?
Oh, that's interesting. I usually associate New Year's resolutions with the Western New Year. But obviously the Year of the Snake is very auspicious. Wishing you all a happy Lunar New Year. And I think if there were one piece of it, wish, it would be to, next time you take a medicine or a pill, think about how many people spent working on that pill and how many breakthroughs they had to make and how many failures had to go into that for that medicine to ultimately be in your hand and for you to take. And I think if every one of us thinks about that, then the scientists and people who are doing that will be much more appreciated.
That's wonderful. Well, thank you so much for being here and for this great conversation. Shall we take a few questions from the audience?
Sure.
Audience, questions? Okay. Here and then here.
Hi, William. Thank you so much for your book. I was fascinated when you observed the fact that when you were trying to find books about drug discovery, you could find books on many other types of discoveries, but not drug discovery. And I was curious if you had thoughts about what is it about society or American culture or that makes drug discovery a less appealing topic for books?
Yeah, they're not none. They're very famous ones like Billion Dollar Molecule or Bad Blood. Or For Blood and Money. Many of them were more gossipy. But I think the challenge is multifold. One is, as we talked about, the discovery of a molecule can happen over decades and is not necessarily just one person from the beginning to the end. Where we prefer, from storytelling, we prefer to just understand what one person did, like the hero kind of thing. The second thing I think is that many people don't want to be on medicines. So they don't necessarily think about the science that goes behind that. The third is the names are very complicated. I guess we do that on purpose, but they're often even difficult for physicians to pronounce. The fourth is the science is complicated, so you have to understand a little bit about that. So there's multiple reasons why. Whereas I think like going to the moon, you can understand I got to get from here to there. Oh, there's no oxygen up there. How do I breathe? Oh, there's no gravity. How do I, do something? I think everyone can relate to that. And then the final thing is very few people take the same medicines. So it's not like you necessarily have a shared experience. Like actually, I don't even, most of the time, you don't even know what medicine your friends are on. And you don't really share that information. So there's multiple reasons why.
And by the way, I just wanted to let everybody know, so we have copies of the book out there, and if you want to purchase the book, you can. And William, you'll be here to sign it, right?
Of course,
okay.
Yeah.
Dr. Powell, that was incredibly inspiring. And I think if the rest of the world heard your message, and it really beautifully articulates how hard it is to develop any drug, especially the wonderfully safe and effective drugs that we have, and how much dedication and perseverance and, sweating blood that many people, including in this room, have to go through. I think people would appreciate how important this really is. And yet, in the media, including social media, politicians, our industry is vilified. So how can we get your message out to the rest of the world so that they really understand what we're really doing to help people?
Yeah, I mean, Seema mentioned the bad pharma reputation. I think obviously the cost of drugs and access becomes a big issue for patients. But again, it's the storytelling, I think, behind how these medicines make it and all of the failure that has to happen, that we need to do a better job of telling those stories. I think the other challenge is, the scientific method and the scientific, the way science works is not intuitive to a lot of people. I think we hopefully, I don't know how many scientists are in the room, but we understand that today's data could be wrong next week, right? And you have to pivot and you're learning as you go. Whereas the public does like to have, I think, a little bit more clarity on things. And so we just need to do a better job of articulating that. I do think we have to be out there, particularly at this moment, saying how important science is for progress and for humanity, and we shouldn't shy away from that. By the way, how many drugs do you guys think, how many new molecular entities have ever been approved by the US FDA? So is it 180? Is it 1,800? Is it 10,000? Or is it 20,000? How many? Okay, yeah, it is 1,800. Often I get, okay. Often people way overestimate. But that just tells you how hard it is.
Yes, I think we have 1, 2, and 3.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Paul, so you mentioned that it is very important to collaborate, right, to make a breakthrough medicine. And in the past probably 2 decades, we have seen like a lot of collaboration between all the different countries or different people. So globalization, to some extent, may help us like bring more breakthrough medicines. But in the past few years, we have seen like deglobalization has been happening, and we don't know whether it will continue. So just want to know your comments on how that can affect how we bring the breakthrough medicines.
Yeah, I mean, I think all of us scientists in the room know that science depends on the free flow of information, right? So information is critical to helping people understand what's happening and making the next advancements. And hopefully we can continue with the sharing of that kind of information.
Thank you. I think there's some, yes, you were here. Do you have, yeah, both of you. Yes. Do you have the microphone? Yeah. Yeah, and then.
Dr. Pao, thank you so much for such an inspiring discussion. In your book, you highlight both how competition and setbacks play a role in, the very challenging industry of drug development. In your experiences, can you talk about when the right moment is to turn away if you think you're too late to advance in a field, or if you should push ahead from a setback?
That is a great question. That's probably more the art of drug development rather than the science part. Yes. I think the easiest part of the answer is, if there's a medicine out there already or medicines that are going to beat you, basically, then you need to really look at that hard and make a tough decision. So it's great for patients, right? But it is ultimately a product that has to be sold, and people have to get their investments back. And so from a commercial standpoint, that's obviously one key point. I think the second one is more probably you're talking on the preclinical side, how much do I keep going and stuff. And there that's a very tough answer to that, because some scientists can look at something and say that data is horrible, and other scientists can say, oh, that data is amazing. And for 10 years, you won't know which one is the right one. So that comes down to your conviction and how strong is the scientific evidence. Is there genetic evidence for this in humans that it's really critical? That's probably a really key factor. Can you define a patient population that would benefit from this particular medicine? And is it going to be easy to develop? And are there good endpoints for to be measured that a regulatory agency could assess, and so on? And so you really have to think about all those factors and then understand that there's going to be a lot of setbacks, but if you really have the conviction that it might be worth it. I do say in the book also, one of the key things is you got to be willing to challenge dogma. Dogma is often wrong, scientific dogma, and it really takes some courage to do that. All of the chapters talk about courageous scientists, though.
Yeah. Courage is an important aspect of, to keep going.
Yeah.
When you have setbacks.
Yeah, like Lou Cantley's in the book for the chapter on alpelisib, and he couldn't get funding for several years after he discovered PI3K.
Yeah, it's a great story.
Yeah.
You had a question as well?
Congratulations, William. Should I stand up or can I sit down?
Okay, good. Either way, whatever is comfortable.
So this could be a little bit provocative, actually. over the last 30 years when we were in the field of drug discovery, clinical trial, etc., there are still limited drugs that really move from bench to phase 1. Most of them failed and then moved, very limited number moved to phase 2, phase 3. However, from now with the AI and all the new technology, seems to me there will be piles of new molecules coming to the, potentially to the early clinical studies. As a physician scientist and also the drug development leaders, now, what do you think, how we can communicate with the physician, actually clinical trial investigators, to say, well, even within the same class, you may have 100 already candidates. Which one would be the one really meet unmet medical needs with very limited patient population? How can we pick up one over the others in order to move the drug, new molecule, to the real, final approval in order to cure or serve the patients? That could be very challenging, I think, what do you think about it?
Yeah, so I think there are several elements to that question. So first is, I think there definitely needs to be more investment in early biology, as I mentioned, and curiosity-driven research. I think even now that I'm in biotech, you see, and hopefully I don't jeopardize my funding here, but you see a lot of people, VCs, who I want that molecule close to clinic, right? Which means it's a more validated target. So if you come with a validated target, yeah. But we need to get more unvalidated targets so we can understand the biology behind them. And somebody has to invest in that. So I'm hoping either the NIH or somebody has the long-term view that we need more of that investment. Now, what you're talking about also is now if you have a target and you have 30 medicines in development, how does the doctor...
How do you prioritize?
Yeah, that is a great question. That's a new problem that I think we never faced before. I think you have to really take a hard look at the preclinical data and see, is it really differentiated or not? And I will give an example. So there's actually 2 examples coming from Roche Genentech, not because I was there, but because it's good examples. But CD20 is a great target, and there's MabThera came from then Gazyva, then mosunetuzumab, and then Columvi. So each one of those is hitting CD20, but each one of them is better than before. And if you look at the preclinical data, there is evidence that, that they would be differentiated and transformative. Similarly, HER2, you have Herceptin, then you have Kadcyla, then you have Enhertu, and so on. So you can take a established target and make a much, much better drug, but you really need to look hard at the preclinical data. I think if you're a physician, scientist trying to do the trials, that's what I would recommend, evaluating that. And hopefully most of the time you'll be right, sometimes you won't.
And sometimes you could be in a stage where you could be taking a big, pile of pills, right? And then you get at least to like 1 pill once a day, to like 1 injection per month.
Yes.
And then, so that it gets better and better, right?
Yeah, that is an underappreciated part of transformative medicines, which is the ease of use for patients.
Yes.
So if something has to be given weekly, but then someone comes out with something that's given monthly, that's a huge difference for patients. And so I would look at that also, right? It's ease of administration, side effect profile, those kinds of things.
So I think we want to make sure, we'll take one last question. Yes, go ahead.
Okay. Congratulations on your book launch and giving a much needed voice to the scientists and, in particular, the recent, the COVID development, right, R&D development there. I have a question, I guess it's a 2-part question. One is, what have you noticed are the differences in terms of R&D approaches towards oncology in the US compared with the European approach and also in East Asia? And in a conversation I had with the Marie Curie Institute oncology scientists before, they told me that in the US, I don't know whether it's the academic setting or in the pharmaceutical setting, it tends to be more segregated in terms of the approach, like between the chemistry versus biology versus other departments, whereas their approach was more integrated. So I was wondering if you can comment more on that. Thanks.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think in probably a couple decades ago, 3 decades ago, the U.S. was definitely the powerhouse in terms of biomedical research and breakthroughs. I think now it's much more distributed across the globe. So just as an example, it used to be in Europe that you used to have to do a postdoc in the US, and then only then could you go back to get to become a professor. But now they don't have to do that. And I think also in Asia it's the same. And then also if you look at the measures of productivity by publication in Nature, et cetera, obviously it's much more distributed across the globe than it used to be. So that's just one factor. I think the other, the main difference I see now is, I'm talking more from a pharma biotech perspective, is I think what I've seen in the US is oftentimes companies will work on 1, 2, 3 targets. It's really hard to get a target into your portfolio, and then you ultimately work on that for many years and so on. Whereas I think I've seen a lot from China. If you just go to AACR, you'll see posters like they're working on every single target out there. And then because of the volume, they ultimately come up with, good molecules and stuff, and sometimes the even better molecules and stuff. So I do think there is a different approach now, what I'm seeing from China, and the US is gonna have to compete with that.
At the end of the day, though, the beauty of the scientific enterprise is that one spark here, creates an idea over there.
Oh, for sure.
And that international collaboration, including like on the Human Genome Project, right, where everybody took like 1 chromosome, half a chromosome, 2 chromosomes, and sequenced it together. And that part of international collaboration still continues to be a key part of the scientific enterprise.
Yeah, for sure. And hopefully that will continue as fruitfully as possible.
Absolutely. Well, thank you all very much, and thank you, William.
Thank you, Seema.
Thank you for this great conversation, and thank you so much. Appreciate it.